Hello, this is Dr. Tom Edwards, Assistant Superintendent of Student Achievement. Welcome to South Kitsap School District Behavior Multi-Tiered System of Supports Common Language Part 2. In this module, we're going to dive into the concept of warm demander. In any organization, developing a common language is crucial because you can say more by saying less. The number one advantage of a common language is speed. Increasing speed means completing complex tasks faster. You'll naturally reduce unnecessary tasks if you don't have to fully explain a concept to get your point across. The jargon and expressions within a common language do something called chunking or compartmentalizing information. In a common language, you communicate using terms or phrases that denote more complex concepts, and you save precious time in the process. So again, this module will address the concept of warm demander and what it means to a behavior multi-tiered system of supports. To begin, let's review what we learned in part 1 around the philosophy of behavior multi-tiered system of supports. We talked about the expectancy value theory and how that leads to motivation. If I expect to be successful in something and I value that something, then I'm going to be motivated to do that something. However, if I expect to be successful in it, but I don't value it and I see it as a waste of time, I'm not going to be motivated to do that something. Conversely, if I really value that something, but I don't expect to be in any way successful in it, I'm again not going to be motivated. So this theory of motivation, expectancy and value, undergirds all of our work with students and with our fellow adults for that matter. And we always want to keep in mind, why would we work to have a solid, clear, and consistent multi-tiered system of supports for behavior? Because we want to maximize our instructional time with students. The less time we spend redirecting student behavior is the more time we have to check for student understanding, to work one-on-one and with small groups of students to meet students' needs in the learning opportunities. We talked about this quote: "We can't hold kids accountable for things we've never told them we expect. Behavior should be treated like academics. Students have to be taught the skills they need." I laid out the concept of a structural engineer. You want a visitor to come into your classroom or on your campus and just say, "Man, that is a really cool campus," or "that is a really cool classroom," but not have any idea of the amazing structural engineering that went into it. So we're not going to hope that things work out. We're going to have a plan, and we're going to have a structural plan. Indeed, we're all going to be structural engineers in our behavior multi-tiered system of supports. We talked a little bit more about that authority and respect aren't quite enough. We know that we'll slow down if we see a police officer alongside the road. And we'll slow down if our Aunt Mary's in the car and she recently lost a loved one in a speeding accident. But we also know that human nature returns to the normal behavior once those temporary interventions of authority and respect are no longer there. So we know that authority is effective, but only in the moment. Respect is probably more effective, but maybe only in those moments. And so those are not enough. So how do we tie this together? This is indeed where the important concept of the warm demander comes in. The idea of a warm demander goes all the way back to Judith Kleinfeld's study in 1975 of Native Alaskan students and what teaching style was most impactful for those students. And she coined that term warm demander. Zaretta Hammond in Culture Responsive Teaching in the Brain wrote, "Your role as an ally in the learning partnership calls for you to know when to offer emotional comfort and care and when to not allow the student to slip into learned helplessness. Your job is to find a way to bring the student into the zone of proximal development while in a state of relaxed alertness so that he or she experiences the appropriate cognitive challenge that will stimulate his or her neurons and help his or her dendrites to grow. So that's one, a mouthful. And two, it involves some brain science in there, right? Relaxed alertness. Stimulate the neurons and help dendrites grow. In other words, learn. So just as a reminder, right? The zone of proximal development, how do we get students to that zone of proximal development? It's that space between what a learner can do without assistance and what a learner can do with adult guidance. So just on the edge of discomfort, right? That zone of proximal development, really that sweet spot for learning. Other studies after Kleinfeld's 1975 study and other writings have really confirmed the impact and the effect of the warm demander teacher style. It's been found to be super impactful with Black African American students and Latino students. It's been called hard caring. It's also been called warm strict. I prefer to say structure over strictness, but that's what Doug Lemoff coined it, warm strict. Here's what I want you to do at this point. Thinking of just initially your very first understanding now of the concept of warm demander, I want you to create a T-chart. Looks something like this. So thinking about your current practice, I want you to take some minutes, reflect. How do you demonstrate in your daily work on the warm side? What comes out on the warm side of your practice? What are very specific things that you do that you think reflect on students in a warm, caring way? Then on the right side of the T-chart, I want you to be reflective of what's the demanding side? What's that demanding side where you don't allow students to slip into that learned helplessness, as Hammond wrote, right? How are you demanding excellence? So take a couple of minutes, pause the video, and complete this T-chart. Where are you, self-assess, where are you currently in your warm practices? Where are you with your demander practices? At this time, pause the video. All right. I hope that reflection was helpful. So let's dig into this concept a little bit more deeply. Continuing on with Hammond's work, she wrote about how the warm demander concept is, again, it's a combination of personal warmth and active demandingness. Active demandingness. That's an interesting way to say it, right? But I can demand all I want from my own kids. But if I'm not actively doing that as a matter of practice, they're probably going to ignore me. So if I combine that with personal warmth, that active demandingness will probably get more out of my kids, and they might actually complete their chores without being reminded 16 times. Okay? So again, down near the bottom of this quote, active demandingness isn't defined as just a no-nonsense firmness with regard to behavior, but an insistence on excellence and academic effort. Please, please, please do not misconstrue and think that warm demander is tough love. Okay, that's confusing it with no-nonsense firmness. It's not just no-nonsense firmness, right? It's that personal warmth. Personal warmth is not involved in tough love. So please do not misconstrue this as tough love. This is a combination of personal warmth and active demandingness. And then finally, what educational researchers and writers have found is that those teachers who exemplify the warm demander style, the students of those teachers really feel like that teacher has their back, right? He or she cares about me, and they will not allow me to be less of a human than I am capable of being, right? They will not allow me to take this one assessment off. They will not allow me to not retake this assessment to get it to where they know I am capable. The culturally responsive teacher willingly develops the skills, the tools, and the techniques to help students rise to the occasion as he or she invites them to step out of their comfort zone and again into that zone of proximal development. So this is a lot, but now we're going to dig into a more detailed self-assessment on what do you think your teaching style currently is, or your leadership style for that matter. So again, Hammond wrote in Culturally Responsive in the Brain about 4 different teaching styles. There's the elitist down in the bottom right, the sentimentalist, bottom left, the technocrat in the top right, and the warm demander, top left. You can see there are 4 quadrants and 2 axes. So down here you have passive leniency. Over here you have professional distance, right? So kind of being distant. Over here, being lenient. And then over here, being warm, personal warmth. And up here at the top, that concept of active demandingness. So really having high expectations, right? So we can think about these quadrants and these axes in this way. High expectations, being distant, being lenient, and being warm and having true care for the individual. So let's dig into these so you can see them a little bit better. So the bottom half, I want you to take a little bit, and I'm just going to leave it on this slide so that you can read these bullets and jot down some notes. Which of these bullets from, say, the elitist may characterize your practice now? Or from the sentimentalist? How many of those bullets? Take a minute, read these, jot down some notes. All right, now let's look at the other 2. So the top half, we've got the technocrat with the fewest bullets and the warm demander, thankfully with the most bullets, because that's the hoped for holy grail, right? That is the teaching style that we want to exemplify, the warm demander. So again, pause the video, take a few minutes, look at technocrat and warm demander, and see which of these bullets seem to show your current practice as either a classroom teacher or a leader. Pause the video, take some notes now. All right, so this is just for self-assessment. As you see these 4 quadrants, the elitist, the sentimentalist, the technocrat, and the warm demander, know that sometimes you're going to be more in one quadrant than the other. You know, similar to what we say about TPEP or evaluation, you know, you want to live in the land of proficient and visit distinguished at times, right? So we want to, as much as humanly possible, live in the warm demander, knowing that full well there are going to be times when we may have to be elitist, for example, or a sentimentalist, or more of a technocrat based on the situation. But we want to live most of the time in warm demander. So it's always good to self-assess on these, dig into these. Would highly encourage you to read further in Zaretta Hammond's Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain and learn more about this concept of warm demander and how you can apply it to your practice. Here's a quote about the warm demander, and this is most definitely an equity approach. You can see from the coining of the term in 1975 and the original study of which warm demander came from, why it is indeed an equity approach. Warm demanders first establish a caring relationship that convinces students that the teacher believes in them and has their best interests at heart. On the basis of this relationship, warm demanders relentlessly insist that all students perform required academic work and treat the teacher and their peers with respect. My absolute favorite word from this quote, relentlessly. Right? Active demandingness, that sort of implies a relentlessly high expectations. Personal warmth, your relentlessly unconditional love and regard for your students, right? Relentlessly applied. So that is the concept of warm demander. Now let's look at warm demander in just one little snapshot of a classroom down in the Bay Area. And I want you to, as this video is playing, take notes. How does this instructor exemplify the warm demander style? You've read the bullets about what makes up a warm demander. You've read some quotes. Now, how does this clip, how does his teacher moves, his actions, his words, how do they exemplify the concept of warm demander?
Wilson, like I said, is going to UC Davis. Ashley on the right is going to UC Berkeley. I don't think she started just yet. I don't know how she started. She started September 2, I think. You get up to the top, you also get to ride down the other side. Oh! See, I planned this out with Marcella earlier. I said, Marcella, why don't you have your phone go off so I could take your phone and then everybody would learn how it works. You see? All right. So one of the things that we're going to be working on while we're at June Jordan is you got to find your happiness, your strength inside you. If you place it outside, when Marcella, like I took Marcella's cell phone, right? She's not tripping. She's like, all right, cool. I mean, I wish I had my cell phone, but she's still focused. If instead I take Marcella's cell phone and she's like, oh my God, she's freaking out, and I got to write her a safety referral, and she's gone down in the icebox. Who had control over Marcella's life? The phone did. And because I could take the phone, I had control over Marcella. Right? But Marcella's cool. She's like, yeah, I want my phone, but it's not who I am. Right? She's bigger than that. She's like, I'm still going to get my education. You can't keep that from me. All right?
Okay, you've had a few moments to watch Mr. Amsler in action there. And hopefully you took note on some of the ways in which you saw Mr. Amsler exemplify the warm demander teaching style. So let's look again at all the bullets that Zaretta Hammond provided us to describe a warm demander. Now, which words stick out to you that you saw exemplified in the video with Mr. Amsler? Did he build rapport and trust with the young lady? Did he express some warmth? He definitely had good-natured teasing. He showed personal regard for students and even fellow students, right? Inquiring about important people and events in their lives. He was telling the students on the first day of school, he was telling about former students and where they were off to college. Earns the right to demand engagement and effort. Do you think with that teachable moment, how he used that cell phone incident to be a teachable moment, do you feel like he used that to earn the right to demand engagement and effort? To sort of justify why he can demand engagement and effort? So consider these bullets and consider Mr. Amsler as you move forward in your own self-assessment of your work as a warm demander. There are a couple of other things that we want to see system-wide in South Kitsap School District as well. These are two very can-do components of the warm demander teacher style. There's a lot of evidence that greeting students at the door of the classroom or at the door to the schoolhouse or at the door to the cafeteria or the entrance to basically anywhere else, the gym, really helps to build student belonging and helps to build student, teacher, staff relationships. Here are 10 reasons, not unlike David Letterman, right? Here are the 10 reasons that we should greet students at the door. This is not a comprehensive list, but it's a list that really encompasses some things that I hadn't thought of before. I absolutely love using number 3, escort any students who have difficulty transitioning to their seat, right? So it makes us be real intentional about some of the supports that we can provide just by being present, just by being there and visible and greeting students at the door to our classroom, to our campus, to our gym, to our cafeteria, to our theater, etc. So feel free to pause it here, take some notes. What are some things, maybe you regularly stand at the door already. What are some things, though, on this list of 10 that you haven't been doing consistently? Maybe create a personal challenge. How could you implement some of these on a regular basis? And then the second thing that we can definitely do system-wide with intentionality is to say every student's name during every meeting. Now, the reason I underlined every student's name and then put an asterisk there is that's a reminder for me to tell you that it's not easy, but it's very doable to say every student's name. And it can become a habit, and a very good habit at that. Again, building students' belonging, right? Welcoming students back from an absence. We missed you yesterday. Adding little doses of humanity as much as we humanly can. Now, the asterisk was a reminder for me to tell you the story of one teacher that I have worked with who really, frankly, struggled with students' names, struggled with the pronunciation of students' names, and I would say for a while, until receiving sort of repeated feedback, struggled to really comprehend why putting more effort towards understanding students' names and how to pronounce them was really crucially important to developing early rapport with students and credibility. So COVID brought on us many, many, many things, but with this teacher, it inspired the idea, and she asked students to record a short video saying their name for her, and then, if necessary, any kind of helpful hints about how to correctly pronounce their name. So in those first days of class, students turned in a short video. She was able to preview those videos, watch those videos, practice herself saying those students' names. So then when they were in class session, and then it was on Zoom only, she was much more effective in granting the student's name the respect it deserves. So that's just one great idea. And even now that we're back in person, what a great idea to just keep going, even after COVID. Have students submit a short video to you in your Google Classroom of them saying their name, pronouncing their name. If they have to give you some helpful assistance in how to pronounce their name correctly, even better. But again, just extending that respect and honor to students as humans and helping them feel, as they should, that they belong every moment on our campus. So fundamentally, right, that warm demander style, there are people from your life who have been warm demanders for you. And as we all work to be warm demanders for the students in our lives, it's all about relationships. We've heard this before. We know this. But numbers back this up. John Hattie, in his initial assessment of meta-analysis of meta-analyses, looking at over 800 million students across the world and all these different studies on student achievement, he found in the first iteration of his study, he found in 2009 that there was a 0.72 effect size for teacher-student relationships. And in the reiteration in 2017, it dropped down to a 0.52 effect size, but still very important and within the zone of desired effects. So when we're looking at things of what has more impact than just a normal typical school year, anything over a 0.4 effect size is that desired effect region. So here's another way to look at it. Here's that hinge point, that 0.4, right? Anything above this gets into you're getting more bang for your yearly buck with students. So all the way over here to the left, with about a 0.74 effect size, which means if the hinge point is 0.4, the student achievement you'd reach in a typical year, you can almost double the student achievement in one school year by establishing a classroom embodied by non-directivity. In other words, you don't have to tell students or micromanage students every step of the way in their learning or in their routines and procedures. You've built in those habits with students so you don't have to be directive. So that level of intentionality and that level of investment early in the weeks of the semester can lead to huge effects in student achievement. Here's empathy. Here's warmth, right? Encouragement of higher order thinking, encouraging learning, all warm demander components, all essential components of teacher-student relationships. Those are the things that matter, and those are the things that matter the most. All right, we've ended part 2. So now what? Again, considering what you learned and or what you were reminded about, what do you plan to start? What do you plan to stop? And what do you plan to continue? So please take a few moments, reflect, jot down some notes, create an action plan. What do you want to start, stop, and continue now that you've learned more about the concept of warm demander teaching style? Thanks so much, everybody. Your work is part of the SK way.